Welcome everyone. My name is Paige Reynolds. I'm the Civic Engagement Manager at Minnesota Opera, and I am joined here by Deborah Jiang-Stein, our wonderful board member of the Minnesota Opera Board. And before I go any further, I want to acknowledge that Minnesota Opera is located on Dakota land. Though we arrived here in a multiplicity of ways, we recognize our occupation on land that is of great historical and spiritual and cultural significance to Dakota people. And we urge each of you to join us in reflecting on your place in these histories and rectifying the erasure of Indigenous peoples in our art form. Deborah Jiang-Stein is a national speaker and founder of the unPrison Project, a 501c3 nonprofit working to empower incarcerated women and girls with life skills and mentoring to prepare for a successful life after prison. Deborah is the author of the memoir, Prison Baby. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you, Paige.
I'm so
Good
excited
to be
have
here.
you. And so let's just start with how and why was unPrison Project founded?
First, thanks for having me here. I'm a very new board member, and so it's exciting to have this be my introduction. I brought you a copy of Prison Baby, and I started the prison work by doing writing workshops. And in prisons around the country, and that spread to different states, even though I'm based here in Minneapolis. And after a while, a warden asked me to speak to the whole population. So I was doing that maybe 2 or 3 years through a couple of different arts agencies. And I hadn't thought of myself as speaking to a large group, or even to really talk about my personal story, which I'm going to tell you, because I was about arts and advocating for creativity and making poetry and creative writing a part of curriculums in prison. So after I said no for about 5 years,
Yeah.
I accepted the calling because it kept happening in state to state.
Yeah.
But so I'm circle back to unPrison Project. You read about the mission, which is to empower incarcerated women, but we also work with men and youth. And I could see that really we have not only a mass incarceration problem, but a public health problem. And it's a issue of needing measures for resources, mental health, drug addiction, employment, jobs, not sitting in a cell. And so I started developing programming around that as I was thinking about doing the writing workshops and thinking, well, maybe I should take that offer and speak to a group of women. The first prison was in West Virginia, and the gym filled with 200 folding chairs. And I shared my personal story, and what I noticed was that I first of all, I hadn't shared my story publicly. The book is only about 5 years old. I only was speaking inside prisons. I'm a product of a system that incarcerates women who are subject to violence and addiction, racism, mental health problems, and my birth mother, in one of her sentences, many sentences, was pregnant with me. It's a really common story today, but not common at that time. So the start and what was a curse became a blessing was that I was born inside the prison where she had her sentence in West Virginia. Spent my first year there, and like kids today, she didn't know what to do. She was allowed to keep me, and for that first year, and I say allowed, and then like everyone else who's in that system, children, entered foster care, and for me, ended up in a permanent family and adopted. And that's where arts came into play for me. Both my parents were professors. I grew up around theater and dance, and who drags 5-year-olds to opera, but that's where I went. Fell asleep, but I became fascinated with the visuals and the costumes and the setting and the music. So that's where I started thinking I could then bring that into my work. And what I noticed is that, so the people I meet, they're not voiceless, their voices just aren't heard. There are voices, there's millions of voices, right? Yeah. And I started just developing programming based on what I saw, and also what had kept me out of prison, because I followed my birth mother's track for quite a few years. reckless and lawless, my own addictions. I'm pretty open about being in recovery, and I share that inside because it's not everyone's open about that.
Yeah.
So I wanted to offer this full circle of I started there, I'm not there now for a lot of reasons that have to do with family and community support, and so I bring that into wherever I go, like Minnesota Opera now.
Yeah. What does the current programming look like for unPrison Project? Like, there's clearly been a journey from where you first started that first time speaking in a prison. So, what does it look like now? Yeah.
It's really evolved, and I should tell you that we formed a lot of partnerships. Right now, because of the pandemic, I want to talk about that, because out here people were saying they're in lockdown and isolated, disconnected from their families. Well, I've seen that by the hundreds of thousands, really. It's, we have over 2 million people in prison. So that's a very common thing. But the numbers most people are surprised at. People in prison, there was a study by Johns Hopkins, have 500% more chance because of tight living quarters. And it's not a chance, but exposure to COVID, which is so different from out here. So everything closed in programming. But we had received a donation of 10,000 reading glasses from iBobs here locally.
Wow. Oh,
and
awesome.
They had them manufactured without wire. We've had them for a few years, and so we had to shift because we couldn't do inside programming, and started shipping reading glasses to prisons around the country and also in Minnesota, because we were advocating for literacy. What surprised me that I learned years ago is that most people I meet in prison have a 4th grade reading level. And that's appalling in this country. There are higher standards in other countries for reading and literacy. So we started getting donations for books and children's books and working with the kids on the outside. And then one time I was in a gym and I saw maybe 200 women there, and they were passing this pair of glasses that were duct taped together down the rows to see something I was handing out. And I thought, well, we can promote and advocate for literacy all we want, but if they can't see the page.
Right, can't even read
so that's
the words. Yeah.
because we couldn't get inside, we just shifted into a mode of shipping books, shipping reading glasses, putting together programs for that. And now we're looking for funding to do a video web series so that we can transmit the curriculum that we developed by video, since we can't come in. And I always thought that needed to happen. I personally like to work inside prisons, but I could only be in one at a time. And people kept saying, oh, we should videotape and have a web series and a curriculum that way. So in a weird way, it's an opportunity, but we've just had to, shift technically and start to build that focus.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've heard that kind of feedback about the pandemic in general. Just like all this video content is something that should stay.
Right.
Something we should keep doing.
And most prisons there's not ability to have Zoom. So one prison last week said, well, can you send us an audio? I mean, the tech in many prisons isn't the best, and some it is. Some places have tablets. So we're just trying to figure all that out. And it's hard. It's a learning curve.
Yeah.
It's taking us a while. Excuse me.
You got to get creative.
Yeah.
So next we have a question from Kathleen Kelly, the Interstate co-librettist. Interstate is a new opera that Minnesota Opera partnered in creating, and Kathleen asks, and she also plays the character Di in the opera. So amazing performer and librettist. And she asks, she says, I loved reading about your Up with Books and Up in the Streets projects, and applaud the great work your organization is doing to support critical life skills for women in prison and support for their children. Do you see ways in which the arts and artists can be involved in and support your mission?
First of all, I watched Interstate and loved it.
Yeah.
I think it was one of the first operas I saw on screen. So I was curious how that was going to work out. And I just want to mention, there was something about there was so much mention about lament and regret in the friendship. And I hear that a lot. And the letter writing, of course, is the only way to have communication. So my connection to opera here in this city is that when Dead Man Walking was here,
Yeah.
two of the performers went into the women's prison and performed. I had always believed that art, so for me, one of the reasons I'm not in prison is I was exposed to so much art that I was just able to expand my view. And art doesn't change anything policy-wise, but it changes people inside. So I knew that. So when I was doing my work of speaking and talking about life skills and reading skills, I would occasionally bring in a musician or a dancer, I'd get permission for someone to come in. And when they came in, I'll tell you, many of the women didn't know what opera was. In fact, one of the questions said, do men ever sing opera? And I thought, talk about two worlds of have and have-nots.
Yeah.
Because it is mostly a male-dominated field, the way I saw. And here, because the women were seeing two women perform, they thought this is what women do.
Yeah.
So it was interesting because maybe again 200 women just started raining tears as soon as they opened their mouths. It was really the most beautiful thing. And we're singing in Italian and sang some spirituals and some stuff from Dead Man Walking. But it was a powerful experience, and some of them said, can we ever go when we get out of prison? Which was kind of amazing. So, and then the pandemic hit shortly after.
Yeah.
So the arts is a way, definitely not to change policy and mass incarceration, but it changes the people. And I wrote a play as an adaptation of my memoir, and I thought that could be something performed in the legislature, for example, just as a learning tool and awareness building. So I think art used correctly, it has a really strong justice application. Definitely. More than entertainment.
Yeah.
But it takes, some, I don't want to say convincing, but some showing of that.
Yeah, willingness to be real and be vulnerable.
Yeah, like it's just not entertainment, we're not just here to make you feel good.
Yeah.
We also want you to learn. And also it gets to a different part of the brain, whether it's dance or music or writing. It's a whole different way.
Yeah.
Way of absorbing information.
Yeah, definitely agree. And it's just that everyone experiencing the same story too, and everyone empathizing at once. I still feel that even through this digital medium of knowing other people are watching it and having to sit with someone else's story that way and be present with it is
isn't that
transformational.
Interesting? We're all in those little boxes, and I still kind of feel the synergy.
Yeah,
it's kind of crazy.
Powerful.
Yeah, very powerful.
So we have another question from the Interstate creative team from Tanya McKinney, the director of the production. And she asks, how do we help as advocates, not just allies?
I met Tanya actually on Zoom, and so I appreciate seeing that question. I was thinking as you did your land acknowledgement, and a perfect example was, I think of allies as very supportive and cheering from the sidelines, so championing in concept. And an advocate actually gets in there and donates time and expertise and money and ways to take action and engage. So I've been on the board just for a couple months, and one of the first invitations I got was to meet on Nicollet Island and pick up trash. And I thought, and I was surprised by that, honestly, and I thought, so this is really working in advocacy. It's more than just land acknowledgement. It's getting out there, getting dirty. It wasn't pretty, it was early. I mean, not a ton of people were there, but it was a way to get involved. So for us, we have lots of allies that champion the work, and I'm grateful for that, because we need to talk more about women in prison and children, I think, just in the conversation. But the advocates are people who call the representatives, write letters, ask us if they can help pack books and be in the warehouse with us. And, it's not glamorous, but it's taking action. We've had, so when prisons were open, we had donors that would say, could we go in with you? And that I would get clearance for a few, and it was, part of it is just learning. Because people in prison are like people out here. It's the fluke of a law, entitlement, privilege, color, class, but really it's people, what they saw is when they took in some of the donors, we're just people.
Yeah.
These are women just like us, could be your sister, daughter, mother, and they are.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of a bridge between those two worlds, and I mean, that's the opportunity I'm taking.
So we'll wrap up with maybe just one more question, and you alluded to it a little bit earlier, but how has the work changed with COVID? How have the needs changed?
Yeah, to tell you the truth, we didn't know how we were going to continue our work, because it's always been, the uniqueness has been we've always been face to face in a lot of states, 15 states, and maybe about 18 different prisons. So that's a lot of people face to face. And I never imagined, other than we knew we could expand if we did videos recording curriculum, but I never imagined we couldn't go in. So the gates closed immediately. I mean, I mentioned earlier the way we felt isolated and locked down, and then I had a personal feeling about that, because we really weren't in lockdown. We could stand at our front door and see someone down the hall or a neighbor, but lockdown in prison is very different. It's a completely different isolation. Yeah. So in a way, I had some pleasure in knowing that people out here had a feeling a little bit about what it felt to be so disconnected from family. And that was kind of a unifying thing. So we could go inside, and services were stopped, lawyers, some healthcare workers. I mean, what we think of as essential really wasn't essential, because it's a survival mode, and I still see it that way, because the people who are bringing it in and out are administration and staff, and it's not blame there, but that's how it's going. And there's not a mandate for a vaccine for either staff or people in prison. So I don't know how the solution will happen in that, but I want programming to continue, and the only way to do it will be to be digital and electronic, because otherwise it's true isolation. I kept contact with staff and administration. So it's changed in that there's no face-to-face, and that was really the beauty of it, that there's something about witnessing people. And we know that out here. And so what I was doing was going in and witnessing and talking about how valuable I believe everyone that I meet is, no matter what happened. They're not the worst act committed. And so that has changed. But we've been communicating by getting books in and the glasses and showing, taking action. Just not face to face. But it will happen one day. I'm just not sure how. Kind of like out here.
Yeah.
How are we evolving?
It's all really unpredictable.
I know.
I'm not sure. Oh, wow. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us, for talking with us, for talking about your story and your organization. Any other final words or things, ways we can keep up with the work of the unPrison Project?
We're on Facebook and Instagram. The website is unprisonproject.org, and my email is there, and my personal email as well. So I'd love for people to connect.
All right. You heard that, folks. Make sure you keep up with the unPrison Project and Deborah. And I think that's it for today.
Thank you so much
for watching.
Thank you.